Okay, right. Well, I'm going to start now. We're getting up towards 50, and so I'll start now with a few sort of parish notices. I've got a few announcements. Um, some dates for your diary. Some of you remember last year we did a bucket and spade list where people nominated 20 aspects of the seaside, and we got people to vote for that. We've done the same again this year. We've got a list of 20 nominations, and the voting for that will go live on the 1st of July, but there'll be more information about that in due course. Second thing to tell you is that the next seminar after this one is on the 10th of July. You can get details from the website. It's on seaside swimming and looks really interesting session there. Third event for the diary is 16th of September this year. We're going to have an in-person event at Weston-super-Mare like we did last year at Blackpool. And the outline of the programme is there'll be a walk or two, but we'll send out details of all this in due course, a walk or two around Weston-super-Mare in the morning. And then the main event will be at the Plaza Cinema, the former Odeon, where we'll be obviously announcing the bucket and spade list, but we're going to have some talks about what's going on at Weston-super-Mare at the moment, a conversation with Paul Doe, the author of that very good book called From a Bag of Chips to Cod Confit, a tour of 20 English seaside resorts, a very entertaining book that is, and a Punch and Judy show just to finish the event off. So if you put the date in your diary, that's the 16th of September at Weston-super-Mare. Something else that'll be of interest that we'll be launching very soon is that we've done a trail of the Art Deco buildings of Bournemouth. Bournemouth has a very rich legacy of interwar buildings, and we've done a short sort of hour and a half walking trail of some of the best Art Deco buildings in Bournemouth. And that will be available as a download and some sort of electronic versions. We're just sort of putting the final touches to that. So just thought I'd give you a few things to get you up to date. What I'd ask you to do, where possible, during the talks, if you could mute yourself during the talks and switch off your camera if you want to. And what I suggest we do is that we'll have questions at the end, but if people, as we go along, if you think of a question you'd like to ask, stick it in the chat and I will work my way through them at the end of the session. Which I think is going to be very, very interesting. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with Katie King talking about the Isle of Man. Then Eric Simpson is going to talk to us about the Scottish distinctive character of the Scottish Seaside. And we'll end with Avril Wayte talking about Bangor, Garth, Pier, which is a very interesting subject indeed. So we've got 5/8 of the people who've signed up. So I think we'll start now if you're ready, Katie.
Okay.
Katie, just a little biographical background. Katie was born on the Isle of Man, studied history at the University of Liverpool before completing a master's in museum studies at the University of Leicester. She's worked for Manx National Heritage since 2004, and since 2021, she's been the Curator of Art and Social History. For the 12 years before that, she was Community Outreach and Learning Officer for the organisation, where she enjoyed engaging visitors with a collection in Manx National Heritage care, while championing an access for all ethos across the organisation. Katie has a passion for audience engagement and delights in using the wonderful collections there to engage and inspire visitors. These collections that she looks after have one thing in common. They're about people. And it's through revealing these human stories that connections can be made. And through these ordinary connections that the collections themselves become more relevant and engaging to audiences. Katie's specialist area of interest is the island's tourist history, particularly the late Victorian tourist heyday. And today she'll be talking to us and giving us a short history of the Manx tourist heyday between 1870 and 1914. So over to you, and thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for that lovely introduction as well. Yes, so as Alan said, I am the Curator of Art and Social History for Manx National Heritage on the Isle of Man, and I'm going to attempt to cram what is normally an hour talk into 15 minutes. So, Alan, I won't be offended if you give me the windmill signal and chuck me off, it'll be fine. So, for those of you that don't know, the reason the Isle of Man's tourism story is so very interesting is that it came out of nowhere. And the reason it came out of nowhere is because in the mid 19th century, the Isle of Man was in a terrible state, really. We were, and still are, an independent country. We are not part of the United Kingdom, and we have our own Tim Ward, our own government. But we had a terrible financial situation in the mid 19th century. Our fishing industry, which had been a big, most people were employed in that way, was in decline. The mines were being abandoned on the island, and there was a period of mass emigration from the Isle of Man where people went to seek their fortune elsewhere, either in the rest of the UK, but often to America or South Africa, Australia. And because there was no work for young people here on the Isle of Man, and there was a very real fear that the Isle of Man was going to become depopulated, like perhaps one of the Scottish outer islands, and that would not do. You know, there needed to be something to save the Isle of Man. There was a little inkling of hope in the 1830s, in fact. So some gentlemen and gentle lady tourists had started to visit the Isle of Man to enjoy our sea bathing, our fresh seawater, and to explore the botany on the island. And so there was a sort of feeling that perhaps the Isle of Man could be somewhere people might like to visit. But it wasn't until we got a new governor on the Isle of Man. We are were governed by the Lieutenant Governor, who was the King or Queen's representative on the Isle of Man. So the governor at this time was a man called Governor Henry Locke, and he was very young when he came here. It was 1863. And he immediately recognised that the Isle of Man was staggeringly beautiful, and that we should rival all the other seaside towns that are popping up all over Britain. We could rival those towns, but not only that, be much better, be more dramatic, be one big holiday resort. And that's what he set about doing. He didn't need to seek permission from anybody to do this. He spent millions of pounds. Government here, Tim Ward government, couldn't stop him. Governors had dictatorial powers. They were the chancellor. They could do whatever they wanted with the money. So in just a 10-year period, the Isle of Man completely transformed itself from this very small fishing farming community into one of the liveliest places in Europe. And this happened so fast, this explosion, that by the end of the period I'm talking about, nearly 1 in 4 people on the Isle of Man were entirely dependent on tourism for their livelihood by 1913, and the Isle of Man had completely transformed beyond all recognition. So I'm going to hop you through that story now, if I can make my slides work. Yeah. The speed as well meant that the Isle of Man developed a very questionable reputation, which hopefully I'll get to at the very end as well during this period. So this is a photograph that's actually taken from the 1950s, and it was used by the Isle of Man Tourism Board for many, many years to promote this idea that the Isle of Man was a place for fun, friendly family holidays on the beach. But in fact, the reason the Tourist Board were doing this is that the Isle of Man had developed a really questionable reputation where large groups of single young men and large groups of single young women were coming to the Isle of Man for a drinking holiday. I liken it a bit to like Magaluf is today. It was a really racy place to come. And this was the place that young people wanted to come. It was a party resort, particularly centred around Douglas, the capital of the Isle of Man. So I'm going to touch on that now. So the very first thing that Governor Locke did was designate somewhere where people could go bathing, designated bathing creeks, natural bathing creeks. And this is Port Skillion in Douglas on the Isle of Man. He decided that Douglas would be the best place to begin this resort because it was the best place for boats to come alongside. Prior to this time, it was quite a seedy sort of port area where merchants would trade. It wasn't really a very pleasant place, so they had to really rejuvenate this area. But there was a lot of panic because it was 1870, and was it quite right for people to be sea bathing? So they had to introduce a lot of legislation very quickly. So this is a good example in this photograph here. They introduced a bylaw where men and women in suitable bathing drawers had to remain 100 feet away from each other at all times to keep order. So in this photograph, this is a male-only bathing creek, but at the top on the wall, the castellated wall, you can see crowds of women peering down at the sort of handsome men below, and they weren't allowed to be naked, I hasten to add. The women had to swim right the other side of Douglas Bay so that there was no sort of impropriety, which I think is marvellous. The biggest problem Governor Locke and the Isle of Man had was getting people to the Isle of Man. I don't know if anyone's travelled here. It's still a challenge today, particularly in the winter. At this time, when he began his idea in the late 1860s, the average crossing time from Liverpool was approximately 12 hours, bordering on 24 hours. There are accounts of boats being stuck in the Irish Sea for 6 days on occasion. And then once you got to Douglas Bay, you had to go down a rope bridge and be rowed to shore. So none of this really lended itself to mass tourism. So the first thing, the biggest investment was this is what we know is the Victoria Pier. You can see it here. It's a deep water landing facility so that steamer ships and later other ships could pull alongside and you could easily disembark. And this cost millions of pounds, this project. But it did mean that the boats coming toing and froing from England and Scotland and Wales could dock alongside, and you can disembark your visitors much easier. There's a lovely quotation on the top of the screen there. It says, "There was scarcely a person in the whole of steerage not departing over the side," which is a lovely phrase for seasickness that I've ever noticed, really. So this really worked. The steam packet company, which in the 1830s had just begun, still going today, they started investing heavily in their infrastructure as well. And by the 1880s, the journey time from England was being reduced to about 6 hours. And actually, they got it down to 2 hours at one point, which meant that it became much more appealing to come to the Isle of Man. And then the Isle of Man Tourist Board worked really closely with all the big railway companies up and down the country to say, if you just save up a few more pence, you working class tourist, can go to the Isle of Man on an exotic sea journey, just like rich people do. And you don't have to save much more, just a few more pennies. Look at this boat you could travel on to the Isle of Man. And did you know that the Isle of Man is full of the most beautiful women in the world? So this was their sales pitch. This was an aspirational holiday where you'll find beautiful women and it's always sunny, always, never rains, never. So that's what they were telling people. And it really, really works. So in 1973, when the Victoria Pier had opened, we were getting 90,000 visitors a year, which is still a huge number considering we were on zero before that. But by 1913, when this photograph was taken, 634,000 visitors were coming to the Isle of Man every summer, just between the months of May and September. And the population of the Isle of Man was something like 30,000 people at this time. So you can imagine this huge swell of British people coming to the Isle of Man, and that completely transformed the island. For starters, this project was begun. This whole seafront you see here was constructed in a 10-year period started in the 1870s on land reclaimed from the sea. All these hotels were built at the same time. It's why they're all identical. And they were leased to local women. So it was, for the first time, it was completely respectable for a single woman to run a hotel on her own. It was respectable work. And because the tourist industry was so important, women absolutely dominated life on the Isle of Man, so much so that women got the vote on the Isle of Man much earlier than anywhere else in the world, because we were central to the economy of the island. So that was exciting, but other things happened as well. So indoor sanitation happened earlier than it ought to have, probably. You could get a daily post service. There were now 11 ships toing and froing across the Isle of Man every single day. So you could post a letter in the morning, get a response by the afternoon, and it was very exciting for island dwellers. It had other impacts as well. For example, if you wanted to work, you needed to speak English because everyone coming here was English. So it did have an impact on the decline on the Manx language. But basically, life was totally transformed on the Isle of Man in just 10 years. The boarding housekeepers on the Isle of Man were very formidable. They made sure you were in bed by 10 o'clock or they'd write to your parents. So a more fun option opened in the 1890s. This is Cunningham's holiday camp, a male-only tented city, which could house 10,000 men a week, 10 to a tent. And the boarding housekeepers did not like this. So they started a smear campaign saying that this place was full of sin and alcohol, and how on earth could they police that women were not sneaking into these tents of an evening. And all that did was massively increase our visitor figures by £200,000. So this scandal broke 200,000 people, sorry. This scandal broke out in 1911, and the next year our visitor figures went through the roof as all these young men came for this, what they thought would be an exciting holiday, but I believe it was very strict in that camp, so perhaps not. And we also opened up the whole of the Isle of Man to ourselves as well. So railway companies were invited to come and build the Isle of Man's first railways. So now the Isle of Man was completely connected in the 1870s, and a little later the Manx Electric Railway was constructed as well. All of those infrastructures are still going today. And then pleasure resorts started popping up all over the Isle of Man. So everywhere the steam train or the railway went, or the MER went, there'd be opportunities to spend your money. So whether it be pleasure grounds or beautiful glens, whole glens were planted, especially in this period. It was just unbelievable the amount of money that was invested in this tourism project. You could have the amusement arcades as well. This is up on Douglas Head, which you had to reach by ferry. This was a very famous place for courting couples. So if you had a holiday romance, you would come here and do some smooching on the bay, up on the hillside. So much so that they created and built a camera obscura so that you could pay a few pence to watch couples courting and kissing on the bay. Yeah, sort of voyeur activity on Douglas Head. This so infuriated the the gamekeeper of Douglas Head that he in fact shot a couple for courting on his land, which landed him in prison, but fortunately the couple were okay. And then there was a great need to entertain these tourists as well. So beautiful ballrooms and cinemas, later on cinemas, theatres were established all over the Isle of Man. This was the first one at the Derby Castle in Douglas. And then it was joined by the Palace Ballroom, and the Palace Ballroom, it got a facelift in 1913, at which point it had the largest dance floor in the whole of Europe. It was absolutely enormous, with a 10,000 person capacity. And it was at the Palace Ballroom that another sort of questionable moral argument came around. So in 1893, the Reverend Thomas Ripon wrote or delivered a sermon called The Morals of Douglas, What is the Remedy? And he was concerned that the pure and simple Manx people and the island itself was being desecrated and demoralised by loathsome libertines preying on our innocent girls. He claimed that Douglas's dancing saloons were nothing more than a public mart for prostitution, and he himself witnessed 500 prostitutes enter the Palace Ballroom on one given evening. You can sort of laugh this off now, but at the time that was printed in the local newspapers, and then it was printed in the British newspapers, and before long there was all this talk about Douglas in particular being absolutely sinful and immoral, and you should not let your young people go there. And the government on the Isle of Man was horrified. They'd invested all this money in this tourism project, and it was about to die. Who was going to come to the Isle of Man for a sinful holiday? So they, from then on, the next season, the 1894 season, they brought over 100 retired police officers from Britain to keep order. They introduced drinking legislation to try and stop people drinking too much. But all that really happened was that the visitor figures just continued to rise as people believed there was a place full of such excitement on their doorstep. And in fact, this is my final set bit, Alan, so I'm on time, I think. Blackpool, Southport, Morecambe and Rhyl, who are some of our nearby rival towns, they started putting in their literature, they would say that they would state, Douglas is flagrantly immoral. The whole of its inhabitants openly encourage frivolity and appeal to the low and sordid tastes of visitors. Their places of amusements are dens of infamy, and their hotels and singing rooms are haunts of wickedness. We will never get as bad as Douglas. So they used us as an attack, but it really didn't help them very much and helped us. And so I'll tell you what the Isle of Man finally did in 1912. They did something very sensible. They set up the Postcard Censoring Committee to try and keep order and stop vulgarity on the Isle of Man. And this is one we've got in our collection of one that was banned in 1912 for very obvious reasons, I think. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. That was absolutely excellent. Yes, I never quite see the Isle of Man in the light that I used to. Now that I know it's got this sort of racy background. Just on a kind of on a side note, one of the possible nominations for the Bucket and Spade list is the Saucy Seaside postcard. So just thought I'd trail that one. Another nomination is Cruden Bay Golf Club, which brings me to our second speaker tonight, which is Eric Simpson. He, like me, is a native of Scotland. He came from Buckie in Banffshire on the north coast of Scotland. So it's obvious that he should be a fan of the seaside. And he tells me that one of his holiday jobs when he was a student at Aberdeen University in the 40s, and he put in brackets, yes, 1940s, was looking after the local outdoor pool at Buckie. Eric has taught in schools from Orkney to the Borders, and then he went on to teach at Edinburgh University and was a part-time adult education tutor at Edinburgh and at St Andrews, as well as doing teaching for the Workers' Educational Association. Eric has written many books on the seaside and Scottish tourism, including Going on Holiday, Wish You Were Here, the Scottish Seaside Holiday, and Hail Caledonia. His latest book is entitled Highways to the Highlands, From Old Ways to New Ways, and they're all I've got 3 of them on my desk at the moment. They're great books, very engaging. Eric has also acted as a historical consultant for the BBC Grand Tours of Scotland programmes. He lives in Fife, but he's carefully not given me his address, as I might be caught robbing his house of his extensive collection of Scottish seaside memorabilia. So today, Eric is going to talk to us about some of the distinctive characteristics of the Scottish Seaside Holiday. Over to you, Eric.
Hello, Alan. I'm putting this under 3 headings: golf, the steamship. There's parallels with Isle of Man there, obviously, and the Scottish Sabbath. Starting with golf, which is has a long history in Scotland. In fact, you can go back to at least 1458, when it was so popular that it was banned by the Scottish Parliament because people were playing useless sports like golf and football instead of practicing archery, so essential for home defence. I would say who was defending against. And there are numerous references on Kirk Session records. The church prosecuted Sabbath breakers with great assiduity in the 17th, 18th, and indeed early 19th century. And they were offenders breaking a Sabbath, very often playing golf on the links. Might be at places like Montrose. There's certainly documented cases at Fraserburgh and Dunbar of people being fined by the church in 1617 for breaking this Scottish Sabbath. Golf here this is one of the early places of golf, St Andrews, rather obviously. Two gents, I think you'll recognise which ones are gents by the sheer size and their apparel, playing against two of the Scottish professionals, number of amateurs, caddies carrying the golf clubs, no golf bags, obviously. These are the kind of people that played golf at St Andrews and elsewhere, a mixture of gents and working people who worked as professionals, making golf clubs, making golf balls, and they would also play. They would also take up golf as and take and very often used to beat the amateurs. There were various societies, clubs formed. One of the earliest was at St Andrews, not the earliest, and they were obliged to wear a red jacket, a kind of uniform. And this was noted by some of the early guidebooks. You see these golfers on the links with their red jackets, so they're a kind of tourist attraction. Golf spread throughout Scotland to the west coast, where it was mainly the east coast where golf was most popular, but it spread to the west coast, including here the Isle of Arran at one of the small resorts there. And Arran in early 1900s had no fewer than 7 golf courses for a population of around 5,000 at that time. Quite extraordinary. Most of the golfers, probably like these young women there, were visitors. So the golf clubs comprised locals, but a very high proportion of visitors. In fact, the golf club at Millport on the island of Great Cumbrae was formed in Glasgow, not on the island itself. Golf then spread elsewhere into England and then across the Atlantic to America. Scottish professionals helping to spread the game. It became immensely popular in the 1890s, and there was a great boom in the 1890s, lots of new courses, and lots of new courses in England as well. I wonder which English seaside resort or Welsh seaside resort had the first golf course, built the first golf course. It'd be interesting to find out. So from golf, I'm turning now to the other distinctive feature of the Scottish Seaside Holiday, this popularity of the steamboat. The steamboat was invented, well, not invented, but the first productive steamboat to be built in Britain was built on the Clyde, the Comet in 1812, and it was built for Helensburgh businessman, a man called Bell, and significantly, the Comet was to carry tourists to his hotel in Helensburgh. So there's a very early connection between the steamboat and as a means of transporting visitors to places on the Clyde and then elsewhere. Indeed, the number of steamboats on the Clyde boomed very considerably in a very short speed of time. This particular vessel sketched here was a Columba, the prestige steamer of the McBrain's company, carrying passengers down the water, but also serving as a first link in what McBrain called the royal route to the Highlands. The steamships Columba sailed to Andrishik, and then they passengers going to the Highlands, the west coast, were transported by a small steamer to the Atlantic side, and then another steamer took them to Ballahoolish near Fort William, and then another steamer took them through the Caledonian Canal to Inverness. And that was a very common way of getting to Inverness, rather roundabout, but it was all part of the steamer boom of the 19th century. Obviously, the steamer was invaluable for tourist development elsewhere. Places like Rothesay, however, on the Firth of Clyde, was being on an island of Bute, was dependent on steamer access. And without that, this particular resort, which is probably the most popular resort on the Firth of Clyde, would never have developed to the extent it did. You can see something of how busy it could be with three steamers in at the same time. Well, one leaving. So, like Douglas, the steamer and steamer piers were very important, and not only for places like Rothesay, which were on an island, but also some of the mainland places. A popular resort like Largs wasn't reached by the railway until the 1890s. On the East Coast, it was a similar situation, particularly on the Firth of Forth. The small resort of Aberdour, which is just 3 miles from where I stay, became immensely popular with visitors from Edinburgh. A short trip for boat sailing from Leith or Granton harbours on the Edinburgh coastline. This particular day was possibly a regatta day, with the people lining up at one side to see the yachts in the distance, and all the different activities that were typical of a small seaside resort in the 19th and early 20th century. But the steamboat access was invaluable here. And as elsewhere, it had its disadvantages. They brought excursionists who were only interested in having a boozy time. In fact, there were steamers started in the Firth of Clyde, and similarly on the Firth of Forth, that were called booze cruisers, that they carried passengers just for where they could have a drink aboard, and where they couldn't have a drink at home in say Glasgow or in Edinburgh, then they could get drink to their fill in Rothesay, Dunoon, or in Aberdour. So this was a conflict between what were called the resident permanent visitors that were there for a week or longer, and the day trippers coming, especially on the Sabbath, and breaking the Sabbath. As you can see, the piers we've shown so far are functional, that they are steamer piers, that they are meant for all sorts of purposes. There was only one pier built in Scotland that could be called a promenade pier, and that was Portobello Pier in 1871. Sadly, it had a rather mixed fortunes. It was destroyed by gale in 1917 and never rebuilt. The building of Portobello Pier caused controversy, however, at the time, that construction had to get approval from Parliament, and this town council of Portobello. It was a separate borough at that time. It's now included part of Edinburgh. Went hot foot to London to go before the parliamentary committee that was discussing the rules and regulations for this new pier. And he wanted the rules to be include restrictions on Sunday access. This was turned down by the committee, the chairman of the committee remarking, "You are very peculiar people in Portobello to deserve such a holy atmosphere." And this takes me now to the dominance of the Scottish churches. They're mainly Presbyterian. They were very strong on the Sabbath. I'm well aware that there were people and churches elsewhere in the British Isles that were promulgating abstention from joyful or even sinful practices on the Sunday, but this influence, I think, was particularly strong in Scotland. There was a lot of controversy within town councils. They were very strongly influenced by the churches, and in St Andrews, for example, in 1905, they built a new bandstand, but the local town council decreed there were to be no performances on the Sunday. And Sunday, of course, for working people was really only completely free day they had. Similarly, in Dunoon during the First World War, an army band started playing on council property in Dunoon. The town council put its foot down. No, the army bandsmen could not play on the Sabbath. Mind you, at the time, the troops were slaughtering each other in the trenches in the First World War, but on a Sunday or a Saturday, it didn't matter, but no music in Dunoon, not on the Sabbath. In various places, boating, tennis, and golf was discouraged, forbidden on Sundays. I can remember as a student at Aberdeen in the 40s, early 50s, being chased off the links for playing football. This is an older picture of the beach at Aberdeen, and rather oddly, a visitor described it. He was writing tourist guidebooks. At Aberdeen, with its tourist holiday facilities, was the nearest place in Scotland to Blackpool that he'd ever seen. I doubt if he'd ever been near Blackpool in that case. Aberdeen, nevertheless, the East Coast wind that Alan mentioned was very popular with visitors and Scottish visitors and others. The attractions included tours out to Royal Deeside, as well as sitting on the beach. This, I think, might also point to one of the reasons why, when cheap flights to warmer climes became available, that the British holiday makers were abandoning the seaside holiday. You didn't need a overcoat and a brolly when you went to Benidorm. By the way, the chap on the left of the picture, seemed to be all in white, looks as if he's just about to say, "Anyone for tennis?" A question could be raised. Where there was very strict Sabbath observance, did it restrict development, because there was no really major resort in Scotland, none developed, even on Clyde, even places like Dunoon or Rothesay, was a huge population in Glasgow in the west of Scotland, that no considerable seaside resort developed. Perhaps did the Sabbath restrictions have an effect? There were other reasons, especially for Rothesay, which had the potential to be like Douglas. But there was whereas there seemed to be encouragement for tourist development in Douglas, this was far from the case at Rothesay, where the Bute estate were dominant landowners. Within the town itself, the town council could encourage development, but beyond that, the Bute estate very strictly kept the lid on development. Didn't want any seaside developments to have a miniature Glasgow anywhere near the island of Bute. So I think just toddle off here at this point, and this postcard, comic postcard from Dunoon be a suitable point for me to sign off. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. I was very amused by the thing about Aberdour. I once came across an article in the local Dunfermline paper in the 1860s called Aberdour versus the Steamer. And the author said that his experience of visiting England was that all that people would do when the steamer arrived was go drinking in Blackpool instead of just drinking in Preston. That was all he thought that happened as a result of the steamer. So if you've got questions for Katie or for Eric, do stick them in the chat. There's some nice comments appearing, but some questions would be good. And I now want to come on to Avril Wayte, who's going to talk about Bangor Garth Pier. Avril's been the chair of the Friends of Bangor Garth Pier since the charity's foundation in 2020. Since retiring from her role as consultant biochemist in the NHS in 2023, she can devote her time to this wonderful charity and its critical role in working with the City Council to protect the amazing pier for the future. For this, Avril chaired various NHS committees and was a trustee of a number of charities previously, including CAIS, a local drug and alcohol charity, and the Royal College of Pathologists, where she served as chair of the Welsh Regional Council and as an assistant registrar for some years. She notes that nothing, however, has given her greater pleasure than working day by day with a wonderful team of dedicated volunteers who give so generously of their time in support of the wonderful pier. And she feels honoured to lead such a great team. So what she's going to talk about today, Avril, over to you to talk about the community-led rejuvenation of the pier.
Well, thank you very much, Alan, for that. I'd actually forgotten what was in my bio because it's been written a while back. It sounds very grand, but we're just a group of people who love the pier in Bangor and work really hard on keeping it going, keeping it alive, making it a destination, which I think we have actually somehow succeeded in doing over the last few years. It's a bit strange doing this talk because we haven't got a beach and we haven't actually got a seaside. So when Anya asked me, I thought, well, I can't really say no, but the pier isn't a beach. So I thought I'd start off by talking about what we actually do have as beaches in Wales, as I am the Welsh representative. And so this is the map of Wales. And you can see that we have a large coastline, 15% of that of the UK. We have a large area and a population of over 3 million people, which is quite small compared to the rest of the UK, obviously. And we have a coastal path that goes all the way around it. And you can see from these pictures that we have a number of highlights. We have Carnarvon Castle, which is close to us. We have Holyhead, which is where all the boats come in from Ireland. We have Hill, which is like the Welsh. You know, when I was a child, our only holiday was going for a Sunday school trip on a Sunday afternoon to Hill for the afternoon. That was our holiday. And then Cardigan Bay down the west coast, it's a very beautiful area, and there's lots of boats that take you out to see the dolphins. You have the Pembrokeshire coast, southwest, which is very pretty, and of course we have Cardiff as a capital. So even though Bangor doesn't have a pier, we do have lots of beautiful beaches, and the 4 beaches you've got on the screen here are all within 20 miles of Bangor. So we are really spoiled for choice. Llanddwyn Beach is the famous one where Dwynwen is a saint, and in January we have our Welsh Valentine's Day in memory of Dwynwen, who was the patron saint of lovers in Welsh. We also have Dinas Dinlle, which is just the other side of Carnarvon, which is a really beautiful beach. Porthyn Llaen is the one that's famous for having a pub on the beach called the Red House, the Red Inn, the Lion Inn, or something like that. And then Criccieth is also very beautiful and also has a castle. So we are very lucky that we do have lots of beautiful beaches. So Bangor, have any of you been to Bangor? Maybe some of you have. Dania has. Wonderful. Eric has. Bangor is a fantastic place. I'd probably say that because it's my home, partly. It isn't always seen as a tourist destination, but it's a place where you really feel you belong. It has a wonderful pier, as you know. It has an university, which is amazing. It's where I studied and did my degree. It was built initially by the quarry men of the local quarry where my dad worked when I was a child, because I lived up in Snowdonia when I was little. And the quarrymen paid to get the university built so their children, like me, could have an education. And people are very proud of living in Bangor. It really does feel like home, I think, to everybody who lives here. And of course, we have the universities. We have lots of students who love living in Bangor, and also so many of them stay on after they've graduated and stay on to live here. But we don't have a beach at all. But we do have a pier. And it was built as a promenading pier in the first place, so people could walk along it instead of walking along a normal promenade. And that's what people still do, of course. You know, I met some people today from Australia who'd come to Bangor. They came to stay in Anglesey, and they were in Bangor today. And they spent every day they've been on holiday. They've loved the pier so much they came every day. And they say it's so peaceful, and every day is different. And we've seen all these birds, and we can see the mountains, and we can see Anglesey, and you know, we can see Llandudno, and we can see all these things, and they just love this. And so many people say the same thing. They can just relax when they walk along it. Now, it is one of 7 piers in Wales. So these are the 7 piers that we have in Wales. So we have Bangor in the top. We have Aberystwyth to the left of it, which Aberystwyth is a lovely place. Again, an university town, and that does have a pier. It doesn't quite have the appeal of Bangor, in my opinion, because you have to walk through an amusement arcade before you actually get to the pier itself. But it does have its own magic. Beaumaris is just across the water from us and is a nice pier. It's quite a functional pier. It doesn't have the same, I don't know, it doesn't have the same atmosphere as ours, I don't think. Colwyn Bay has worked really hard to make the most of their shortened pier. And I believe that last weekend, they actually screened the Eurovision Song Contest from their pier. And it was a hugely successful event, which is a really nice, novel way of doing things. Then we have Llandudno Pier, which is just along the coast from us. And actually, we have a festival in our pier this weekend. And yesterday I met two of the stall holders who will be coming with coffee and slush drinks for us. And the gentleman's nephew is the man who owns Llandudno Pier. So that's a nice sort of link. And then we have the Mumbles and Penarth in South Wales. And I have never been to any of those, I have to say. I don't think I've even been to Penarth or the Mumbles, let alone their pier, because South Wales, is all the way down there, and North Wales is all the way up here. So Bangor Pier, it was opened in 1896. So it was opened on May the 14th. So yesterday, we were 128 years old, which is brilliant. And I put this fact on Facebook yesterday morning, and so many people said, "Oh, hooray, happy birthday. Oh, isn't that wonderful?" And of course, every year, for the last 4 years now, we have a birthday celebration for the year for the pier in May. So this coming Sunday, we will have our birthday party, 128 years. And for some of you who may be coming to the National Pier Society's AGM and various meetings this weekend in Bangor, then you will see our pier in all its festival glory. And I hope some of you can join us. Now, it's owned by Bangor City Council. It's effectively run day by day by our charity. And we started in 2020 with 4 members. So looking back, I think, oh my God, how the hell did we do this? I have no idea. We just put one foot in front of the other, and it grew and grew and grew. And 2 years ago, we were registered as a charity, and we're now obviously in our 4th year. And we are actually open 365 days a year, which is quite an achievement for us. We're even open on Christmas Day and Boxing Day. And at the end of the pier, we have a pavilion where it's always open. And I think that's part of our success, is that the entrance kiosk is always manned. The shop that we have where we sell our crafts is always manned. The pavilion at the end of the pier is always open. And I think that certainty is what makes it successful. If the pier has to be closed because of adverse weather, fair enough, it's closed. But if it's open, we are there. And I think that's what people like. So many different people come for so many different reasons, and they always enjoy it. They enjoy walking, they enjoy crabbing, they enjoy meeting their friends, they enjoy going to the shop, they enjoy going to the end, they enjoy looking at the snow on the mountains, as you can see in that bottom photo there. And it's great. Our volunteers, they are awesome. I'll come to them in a minute. Okay, so our constitution, which we got for the Charity Commission, said that we are supporting the preservation, protection, restoration, and the importance of the structure of the buildings on Bangor Pier, and engaging the public in all this, which is a lot of words to say we're looking after it and we want people to come and enjoy it, and they do. And we love it when people say how much they love it. So on a summer's day, we can easily see 1,000 visitors, which is quite a lot, really, for a little pier in North Wales. Our last year we had 110,000 visitors in the year, and as I've just said, it's loved by the locals, it's loved by visitors. There's things for the kids to do, there's things to chat. If you live in Bangor, you don't chat to your friends, you jangle. Okay, just a word for you, so a new word for your vocabulary. So people love, like that picture there, people love jangling on the pier. People love crabbing. We have cycling groups that come, they can't cycle on the pier, but they can meet and leave their bikes at the entrance. We have this huge deck chair, which looks great, but it's awful if you get in it and try to get out. It's really embarrassing. We have students who graduate, who come down to the pier and have all their photos taken in their graduation gowns. And I think the third picture along is our festival last year. You can see the fire engine, so the kids can all have a have a go. And that's what we'll be doing this coming weekend, of course. So how did we do it? Well, we've got over 80 volunteers. We charge 50p to come on. When I was there today, we had a couple who said, oh, can we have 2 pensioners' rates, please? And we said, oh, we don't have any pensioners' rates anymore. And they said, well, you used to a long time ago. It was only 20p. We said, well, it's only 50p now. And they said, oh, okay then. So we do get a few people who moan and groan and say, oh, I don't want to pay. And it takes all my powers of patience to be quiet and not have a go. Because the majority of people really enjoy paying and they give more than the set amount. But I suppose you'd always get somebody awkward. But last year we collected over £80,000. You know, it all goes to help the council with maintaining the pier. In our shop, on the bottom there, the little green shop, we have over 40 suppliers, all local. We man, like I say, every day, 7 days a week. And so the group we have in the entrance kiosk, the group we have in the shop, there is some overlap. Some people volunteer for both, but people just love it. You know, we've got a new lady now volunteering in the shop. She's quite recently bereaved, and she would take all the shifts. She had the chance. You know, it gives her something to do. It gives her meaning. It gives her a feeling of belonging, and that's the thing for all our volunteers. It's their pier. They belong. They're doing something for their pier, which so many years was going downhill, and all they could do was moan and say, oh, this pier's going downhill. Nobody's doing anything about it. Now they're doing something about it, and that is priceless, really. Okay, so the future. So we want to build on this foundation. After all, it's only been 4 years. We've got a long time to go. We are just about to form a community interest company, which will help us with applications for funding for heritage lottery fund monies and things. And you can see that roof, that domed-like roof in the top picture. Well, that used to belong to a lookhouse kiosk at the end of the pier. The kiosk had this integrated and the roof was taken off. Now, today, I actually filmed a video of the roof going back down the pier with a huge great crane lifting it up. And the local joiners are currently in the process of rebuilding that kiosk, and then the roof will go on. And our funds from our shop are paying for all our work to be done. So it gives us a really good feeling that we are contributing to something concrete. We're not just paying for things that nobody can see. We're paying to build that kiosk, for example, and other things afterwards. So we're protecting our pier, supporting its structure for the public, for the future, and engaging our public as well. And finally, thank you for listening to me. Our little coastal Welsh city, a place with no sand, with a beautiful pier, and a community that is proud of belonging to Bangor and proud of its pier. Diolch am wrando. Thank you for listening. And there's a picture of Bangor. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, thank you very much. That was a really interesting talk and quite an achievement to be able to get that pier so busy and so active. That's
I know.
a tremendous achievement. I'm very, very impressed. We're just about out of time, but there are one or two questions that I've seen popped up in the chat. And the first one or two were for Katie before you have to disappear. When will the pier on the Isle of Man be open again to visitors?
I don't know. So a bit like the Bangor Pier, it's completely community led. So it's owned by the community. It's owned by this really amazing volunteer group company. So it is open. They're doing it in phases. So the first phase is open. I don't think it's open all the time. I think it's on special days, or you can book an appointment and it takes you so far. So at the moment you can invest in the pier, you can buy a plank, or you can do things like that. So, but it's, I know Avril was saying that it's owned by Bangor City Council. This is owned by by this amazing volunteer group. So yeah, I mean, so you can see it now. And if you're on the island and you want to go onto the pier because you're interested, definitely you can make contact with the group, because they're there nearly every day working. So you could certainly get on the pier at any point now if you've got an interest.
And there was another one for you as well, Katie. Can parallels be made between the history of the Isle of Man and the Channel Islands regarding popular tourism and tax haven status?
Well, I would say we're in no tax jurisdiction. We are not tax haven.
Okay, I knew there would be.
So I used to live in Jersey, actually, so I've got quite a lot of sympathy with both islands. But unfortunately for the Isle of Man, we do not have the climate of the Channel Islands. So for a long time, the Channel Islands were sort of a little bit rivals for us, because they had the same exoticism, they had the sea crossing, but they had a far better climate, and it felt a bit like France. So we were big rivals, but now we're great friends. So all the Channel Islands, Jersey, Guernsey, and the smaller islands as well, we're big friends because we're all crown dependencies, and we look to each other. And in fact, during lockdown, Guernsey and the Isle of Man, we had 0 cases of COVID for a long time, and we were totally closed to visitors, and we opened a bridge between Guernsey and the Isle of Man, so you could holiday between each other's islands, because we both had a 0 case. So yeah, there are definite parallels, but they've got the sunshine hours that we don't have.
There's another question from Lorna, and I think I'm going to be like a schoolmaster and say I think Lorna should be kept in after class, and I will give her a 1-hour lecture in answering the question: what ignited the fashion for promenade piers, and did they evolve from working piers, or were they a separate development? But I don't think we can answer that one in under an hour, so I think we might pass on that one. There's one that I wanted to ask you about, Eric, because Katie brought up about the sauciness of at least one part of the Isle of Man. Were there any? I don't remember this, but were there any resorts in Scotland that had that particular reputation for being the naughty resort?
Not really. Well, perhaps at different times, young people would congregate at one particular resort, but no, nothing really on that scale. I think they were too canny. They might be saucy, but they wouldn't advertise it.
Of course, I think to the church, every seaside resort was probably a naughty place.
Can I add something that about Bangor Pier? One of my sons, who was resident in Anglesey at the time, paid for a plank for the improvement of Bangor Pier.
That's right. It was when the pier was rebuilt. It was closed in the early 70s because it was dangerous. And then in the 80s, it was sold to Arfon Borough Council, which was the forerunner of Bangor City Council, for a penny. And Bangor City Council then rebuilt it all. And as part of the rebuilding process, they were getting money from wherever they could. And one of the things they did was sell planks for £10. And if you actually go onto the pier, you'll see a whole row of like boards on the side where people's names are written, and they're the names of the people who bought planks for £10. And so that would have been what it was. So people paid £10 for a plank, or they paid £100 to sponsor a kiosk. And that was part of the rebuilding process.
I don't think Eric was going to ask for the plank back, by the way. I'm just thought.
Oh, good. We do actually, in our shop, if any of you ever come to Bangor, we do have a local wood turner called Jules Tattersall, who bought a lot of the wood from the original pier and makes wooden items out of it. So we have clocks and candle holders and bottle openers and key rings and all sorts of things. And the wood came originally from Malaya, my husband tells me.
All right.
It's a particular kind of hardwood. So we have gifts that are made from the wood that was originally on the pier in 1896.
Okay, well, I'm going to I think sort of covered some of the main questions I saw in the chat. I just want to end by saying thank you to the three speakers. Thank you to Avril, thank you to Eric, and thank you to Katie. They were absolutely excellent. We can give them the virtual sort of round of applause, so to speak. So thank you very much. And again, dates for your diary: 1st of July, the bucket and spade list will open, and the next seminar, 10th of July, on seaside swimming. So go on the website and sign up for that. And 16th September, I hope we'll all get to meet up in Weston-super-Mare, show you the joys of it, and hoping for lots of visitors to come to Weston-super-Mare, including perhaps the sea on this occasion, which would be a welcome rare treat. But thank you all for coming, and hope you have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.